Alright, I'm back here to show you the work I'm doing on this Arrma Talion. I've actually already installed the front bumper. This wasn't that clear, but you actually do not remove the stock Arrma bumper here because it holds the hinge pins in for your front suspension. So if you took this out and then you just attach the bumper to the bottom of the chassis, these hinge pins could back out. So you actually leave that on there. Moving on to some more complicated stuff, we have the new wing mounts from RPM. These are quite a bit higher than the ones that were stock on the Talion because I actually want that wing to be raised up, and it's also going to be further out, so I think it'll improve the looks. What's interesting about these new RPM wing mounts, they were probably designed for the previous version Talion, but they work just fine here, as you can see. The interesting thing about them is that the wing mount actually locks into this hot racing chassis brace, just like the standard chassis brace. I'll show you, let's see, here's the original chassis brace that I took out, made of plastic. Here's the hot racing aluminum chassis brace. Either one actually hooks into the wing mount, so that if you're going to change one and you want to change the other, do them at the same time, because here we're going to be changing both at the same time. So, hot racing includes some pretty nifty anodized red aluminum spacers here. So I'm going to show you how that works. We go back to the original bolt that Arrma included with its chassis brace. I'm just going to fit it through the hot racing spacer, then through the brace, then I got to put in the other longer spacer, and then that comes out the end of here, and we're going to use the stock. We had a little nut here that Arrma includes that goes right inside the wing mount here. It's a little bit tight here, but we're going to get it in. Now we're not quite done assembling this wing mount. We actually have to go back and insert a few of the stock Arrma pieces, right? Because all you're getting there is the wing mount, not the spacers in between. Or I should say, really what you're getting is the wing arms. The wing mount itself is a stock Arrma piece. So I'll show you how that reattaches to this RPM wing mount in just a second. Okay, we're tight. So we have, these are the spacers that go in between the two wing arms, whatever you want to call these. I'm actually curious what RPM calls them. They call them wing mounts, but really, you know, kind of the wing mount is this part, right, that goes on top, and that's a stock Arrma piece. I'm going to call it a wing arm, all right? Maybe I'm the only one that will call it that, but that's what I'm calling it. Okay, and then these stock parts from Arrma then screw in through the RPM wing arm and into those stock spacers. Where are we? Oh yeah, we have to flip this over and of course screw in. There we go. So whenever screwing metal into metal, you want to use thread lock, and this is a metal screw and we're screwing into an aluminum brace now instead of plastic. The stock Arrma brace being plastic meant you actually didn't need to use thread lock on there. But now that I'm screwing into an aluminum brace, I do need to use thread lock. I got to make sure this brace is in place. I can see it kind of notches into the chassis right here, but I want to tighten it down so that notch is in place. Now we got to attach the front chassis brace. Okay, so I've got to open this up. This one's actually a little bit simpler to attach because there's no spacer involved. It just mounts directly to your steering plate up here. All right, so again, this has a little notch in it that fits in the bottom of the chassis. Okay, I put a little thread lock on this one. Again, metal through metal. Means you need thread lock. Let's tighten that down, and then I'll do the one on the bottom underneath the chassis. Okay, again, I need a little bit of thread lock. And let's see, I gotta get that, there we go. There we go. Got that little notch right into the chassis. Perfect. So there you go. That's where the front brace goes, and that's the rear brace. Last two remaining upgrades I have, now that I've done the bumper, the skid plate, the wing, and the braces, are the servo mount, and then of course the rear arms and the mud guards that go on the rear arms. I think I'm actually going to go ahead and do the arms next. Alright, to remove these rear arms, I have to remove the hinge pin brace. Okay, that's kind of a two-part deal here. And to remove this, I actually needed to take out two screws from the rear and two underneath that hold it in place. You can see how it's attached to the chassis. I also have to remove the swing arm attachments here. All right, and then I also have to remove the hub carriers. So that's one more. I'm going to use my power tool here, back it out. And this arm should come free. All right, I'm going to do just one arm here on camera. Oops, now some spacers fell out. Ha ha ha. I'll have to look at the manual. So these fell out. I think this is what sets your toe on the rear. I may just look at how the other one's set to reattach it. So when I pull off the other one, I'm going to be very careful and watch where these go. I've got two thin ones and one thicker one there. There's one other piece I got to tell you about, which is that sets this little Allen head screw sets your droop screw. So I have to remove that so that I can reinstall it in the new arms. So I've got my RPM mudguards and my RPM arms. So I'm going to open those up. So of course you have to make sure you know which one goes on the right and which one is left. There's a handy marking here, L, so that's not the one I want. I'm on the right side here. As long as I'm in here, I'm going to put a little grease so that I know that these are going to move a little bit more smoothly. Notice that RPM's arm doesn't cover the whole hinge pin, so that's interesting. That's going to be less friction, but also more chance to get dirt in there. Interesting thing about the RPM arm is that the droop screw doesn't play as much of a role because they actually have it pops out here, the plastic, so that the arm itself actually acts as the droop screw. That's interesting. So you can set a greater amount of droop, but I guess the default droop is actually set by the arm. So that's another difference in the design. So I'll go ahead and slide that on. I'm going to put a little bit of grease on the two areas of the hinge pin where there's contact between the hinge pin and the arm. Let's see. Okay. Now this is where I sort of wish I had three hands to actually set all these pieces in place. This goes through here. Again, I'm going to put a little bit of grease on here. As long as I've taken it apart, might as well put it together right. So, okay. Now the hardest thing about this is going to get those two other little spacers in here without them falling through. I get this in place. And then, oh, there's a lot of friction in there actually. I got to get these two spacers in. This is always a little bit tricky because they're going to fall through and I need to get that pin through. Let's see if I can do it. Will I be lucky and get it on the first try? Yes, got it. Okay, so that's in and I'm going to put the bolt on. Right, I'm going to be putting on the mudguard on the right side. Conveniently, the RPM product does, again, label it as R here. So it's really nice. By the way, all these RPM products are made in the USA. I always like to point that out because I think that's rare these days, but a nice thing to find. So let's see how this looks. Of course, this is custom made for the RPM arm, so it should work just fine. It should fit just fine. Right? Mudguards on. Let's take a look at these arms, like I said. So there's a good amount of flex in this, right? Let's take a look at the RPM arm. I really have to work hard to bend that. It's definitely stiffer. This one has a lot more give. Also notice, I think this RPM arm is a little bit lighter. At least RPM says it is, and it feels a little bit lighter in the hand. So it's stronger and lighter, more cutouts, but maybe more material in the right places. So a really nice product from RPM. So after I put on the other arm, I'll be back to show you how I mount up the rear hinge pin brace again. All right, I've got both suspension arms now mounted with the mud guards. I'll note that although there are two suspension or shock mounts here, you actually have to use the inner one, because if you use the outer one, the shock actually, shock tie rod actually hits the arm, and it just won't go into place. So I use the closer of the two mounts on both sides. Now I've got the primary hinge pin brace in place. Now I'm going to put the second hinge pin brace. This is the one that locks into the chassis. So we've got two screws that go in the back and two underneath the chassis. All right, we're on the last step here. We're going to be installing the hot racing aluminum steering servo mount. Right, here are the parts. First of all, the mount itself. Then you have the 4 aluminum standoffs. Then you have the screw kit that includes some washers, 4 screws for going through the bottom of the chassis, and then 8 screws that go through the top of this mount. Okay, next thing I need to do is remove the mount from the bottom of the chassis right here. So one thing about this assembly is that if you did it the standard way, you'd actually have to remove the servo cable, pull it out from the receiver, and it's kind of a big mess. But instead what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the servo horn off and slip the servo through the mount. There we go. Now I don't have to worry about undoing all the cabling that's been pre-cabled from the factory underneath the speed control and then over to the receiver that's in the waterproof box. That would be a lot more disassembly. So now I've got my servo free. I'm just going to let it sit there. And I'm going to install the hot racing parts. Now I do want thread lock on here. Got it right here. Alright, I've got my 4 screws through the bottom of the chassis, so now I've got my standoffs. It's a little bit of a puzzle there, but as you can see, I just slipped this over without having to take this cable off. Alright, so let's drop it into place. Now Arrma Servo comes with these rubber mounts. I actually have to take these off. Here they pop right off. I have to take them off to run with the hot racing mount. Use a little bit of Loctite to attach this to its stand. Right here. Now you have to be careful when mounting this servo, now that you don't have those rubber dampers in there, those shock absorbers, you have to be careful that you don't break the legs off of your servo. So, now I've got it mounted. Doesn't seem to be any flex there. Let's attach the servo. I'm actually going to go ahead and drop a battery in here and make sure I've got my servo arm in the right position. Looks to be centered. And just from examining the servo mount, there seems to be a lot less play. Let me screw down the servo arm now. So overall, there's a lot less flex than there used to be. There's still a little bit of back and forth movement, but quite a bit less than before. So this aluminum mount is just a lot more solid than the stock plastic mount. Okay, last step is to bolt on my tires. So here we have the full chassis built up with all the must-have improvements. Got my tires right over here. You can see what this looks like. I'm using, these are Proline Shockwaves. These are about the same height as the stock tires, but quite a bit wider. And I think that just gives it a little bit better look. Alright, here's the completed truck with all the upgrades. RPM front bumper, rear skid plate, RPM wing mounts, Shockwave tires from Proline, RPM rear arms and mud guards on the back. And then, of course, from Hot Racing, front and rear chassis braces and the servo mount. So let's take this out for a drive. All right, I got my upgraded Arrma Talion V3. This is the 2018 edition. Some of the upgrades you can see on the exterior, the new wing mount, which is more like the Talion V2 wing mount. We've got, of course, the Shockwave tires from Proline, which are wider, although not much taller than the stock tires. I just like the look of those mostly. The stock tires actually have pretty good grip, but look a little funny. We've got the mud guards, which actually already have mud on them because I've been running this, as well as the RPM rear arms that really stiffen the rear end. Got the RPM front bumper. Also have the I don't know if you'll be able to see that in here. In there we've got one of the Hot Racing chassis braces. I've got another in front and the Hot Racing servo mount as well. So I'll just show you how this runs. You won't be able to really tell whether or not the chassis braces are doing anything, but you can see what it looks like and how the tires work and the wing works. All right, so here we go. And this is on 4S. One thing I really like about the Talion is it's very, very planted. So while in a sense, I kind of made this like a Creighton a little bit in terms of the size of the tires and popping the wing back up, it's still a little bit lower and it's not quite as wide as the Creighton. So it handles really nicely. It really reminds me of a buggy, of an 8 scale buggy, except with a little bit more ground clearance. I was concerned that these Shockwave tires wouldn't have enough grip out here on this somewhat wet grass, but they're sticking pretty well, and I think that has a lot to do with how nicely balanced this Talion chassis is. really have to work to flip this chassis. This truck is really planted. All right, I'm gonna send it up that hill and say goodbye to it. Let's see if I can bring it down. Here we go. Woohoo! All right, we'll catch you next time.